The sound was vulgar. Not a loud crack, but a wet, percussive thud that tore through the sterile hum of the Galleria Grande luxury market. It was the sound of a leather loafer, a Gucci loafer to be precise, connecting with the side of a paper grocery bag. For a split second, the bag held its shape, a defiant brown rectangle against the polished Italian marble. Then it surrendered. A carton of organic eggs erupted in a yellow smear. A cascade of bright red apples, each one a perfect, glossy sphere, scattered across the floor like spilled jewels, rolling in chaotic, silent arcs. Aisha stood frozen, the torn handles of the bag still clutched in her hands. The impact had been so unexpected, so personally directed, that her mind refused to process it as anything but a bizarre accident. But then came a laughter. It was a sharp, braying sound, designed for an audience. Mark stood there, his foot still slightly extended, a smirk playing on his lips that was both cruel and performatively charming. Beside him, a woman with blonde hair sculpted into an immobile helmet of perfection held up her phone, its camera lens a single, unblinking eye. This was Tiffany, Mark's latest upgrade. "Oh, look at that," Mark said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Someone's dinner is making a run for it. Guess it's ramen noodles again tonight, huh, eh?" He nudged an apple with the toe of his expensive shoe, sending it skittering towards a display of imported cheeses. Tiffany giggled, a sound like ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. "Literally so clumsy," she chirped, panning her phone from the mess on the floor to Aisha's stunned face. The humiliation was a physical force, a wave of heat that washed over Aisha's skin. It wasn't just the act itself, but the public nature of it. The shoppers who paused, their gazes a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The sheer, unadulterated glee on Mark's face. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed behind her eyes. Mark, 3 years ago, promising her the world from the cramped confines of his tiny apartment. "One day, babe, we'll own a place like this," he'd said, gesturing vaguely at a magazine ad for a penthouse. Now he stood in a place like this, treating her like dirt on his shoe. The real impact wasn't the ruined groceries. It was the cold, calculated assertion of her worthlessness in his new world. He wasn't just kicking a bag. He was kicking the memory of who they were, and kicking her for remaining that person while he had, in his mind, ascended. A security guard approached, his walk a practiced, weary plod. He was a man in his late 50s, his uniform slightly too tight at the belly, his expression one of permanent, low-grade annoyance. His name tag read Davies. He surveyed the scene with a sweep of his eyes that lingered on Mark's tailored suit and Rolex before flicking dismissively over Aisha's simple jeans and waitress diner work shirt, which she hadn't had time to change out of. The power dynamics of the situation were assessed and calculated in less than 3 seconds. "All right, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice directed at Mark, the perceived center of gravity. Mark held up his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "Just a little accident, officer. My old friend here dropped her things. We were just offering to help." He gestured to the phone in Tiffany's hand. "Just capturing the moment, you know?" For a laugh, Tiffany lowered the phone, a flicker of something, maybe caution in her eyes, but the smug smile remained. Aisha finally found her voice, a small, tight knot in her throat. "He kicked it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He kicked the bag on purpose," Officer Davies sighed, a long, put-upon exhalation. It was the sigh of a man who had already decided who was credible and who was a nuisance. He looked at the mess, the broken eggs slowly congealing on the pristine floor. "Ma'am, we have a policy against creating disturbances," he said, his tone shifting from inquiry to official warning. "I'm going to have to ask you to clean this up and move along." The injustice of it was breathtaking. He hadn't asked a single follow-up question. He hadn't looked for witnesses. He had simply absorbed the visual cues of wealth and poverty and rendered his verdict. Aisha started, but Mark cut her off. "Look, we don't want any trouble," he said smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on Tiffany's back. "She's just a little emotional. We used to date. It didn't end well." He leaned in conspiratorially toward the guard. You know how it is, this was his masterstroke. He'd framed her as the hysterical ex, a narrative so common, so easy to believe, that it erased the truth of the last 30 seconds. Davies nodded, a man-to-man look of understanding passing between them. I understand, sir, the guard said, his tone now deferential. He turned back to Aisha, his face hardening. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Get a cleanup kit from aisle 3 and take care of this. Or I'll have to escort you from the premises for causing a public nuisance, he failed her. The system, in the form of this one biased man, failed her completely. And in that moment, watching the complicit nod of the authority figure, something inside Aisha shifted. The heat of humiliation didn't vanish. It cooled, hardening into something dense and heavy, like steel. The tears that had threatened to form evaporated. The tremor in her hands ceased. A strange, unnerving calm settled over Aisha, a stillness that was more intimidating than any outburst could have been. She didn't look at the mess on the floor. She didn't look at the smug face of her ex-boyfriend. She didn't even look at the dismissive security guard. Instead, she slowly, deliberately, pulled her phone from her back pocket. Her movements were fluid and economical, devoid of any wasted energy. Mark watched her, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. He expected shouting, crying, a scene. This quiet composure was unexpected. It threw him off his rhythm. What are you doing? He scoffed, trying to regain control. Calling your manager at the diner to complain? Tiffany snickered on cue, raising her phone again to capture this new, strange development. Aisha ignored them. Her thumb moved across the screen, tapping out a short, simple message to a single contact. The message contained only two things, a location pin and a number. 15, then she hit send. She locked the screen and slid the phone back into her pocket. A silent timer had begun. 15 minutes. That's all it would take. She finally lifted her eyes and met Officer Davies' gaze. Her expression was unreadable, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. I will not be cleaning that up, she said. He assaulted me, and you are refusing to do your job. So we will wait, the guard's face flushed with anger. Her refusal to be cowed was a direct challenge to his authority. Excuse me? You're refusing? He sputtered. That's it. You with me. We're going to the office. Good. Aisha said, the single word hanging in the air. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't sarcastic. It was a statement of agreement, as if this were all part of her plan. Mark, seeing the situation escalating in a way that might draw unwanted managerial attention, tried to de-escalate on his own terms. Hey, come on now, let's not blow this out of proportion, he said, his tone now magnanimous. It was a joke. A stupid joke. Here, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill, holding it out to her. For the groceries. Let's just call it even, the condescension was thicker than the smell of the imported cheese. He wasn't apologizing. He was paying a fine, dismissing her and her life as something that could be settled for a negligible amount of cash. Aisha looked at the bill in his hand, then back up at his face. She didn't move a muscle. She just stared, her silence a profound and unsettling rejection of his entire world. The $50 bill seemed to shrivel in the space between them. All right, all of you. My office. Now. Officer Davies snapped, his patience gone. He clearly wanted to reassert his control, and moving them to a private space was the only way he knew how. He gestured sharply with his thumb down a service corridor. Let's go, Mark shrugged, tucking the 50 back into his wallet with a flourish. Fine by me. Let's get this sorted out. Tiff, you coming? Tiffany, sensing the potential for more drama to film, nodded eagerly, her phone held low but still recording. The walk to the security office was a study in contrasts. Mark strode with a confident swagger, whispering and laughing with Tiffany, performing for an imaginary audience. Officer Davies marched ahead, his back rigid with indignation. And Aisha followed, her steps measured and calm, her posture perfect. She looked less like a detainee and more like a queen inspecting her dungeons. The office was exactly as one would imagine, small, windowless, and smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly greenish pallor on everything. There was a single metal desk cluttered with monitors showing grainy CCTV feeds and 3 mismatched plastic chairs. The claustrophobia of the room was immediate. "Sit," Davies commanded, pointing to a chair. Aisha sat, placing her hands neatly in her lap. Mark leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, the picture of casual arrogance. Tiffany hovered by the door, still filming. "Now," Davies began, pulling out a clipboard and a pen with a sense of theatrical importance. "I'm going to take your statements." "Sir, we'll start with you." He was giving Mark the floor, allowing him to frame the entire incident. But before Mark could speak, a sharp, insistent buzzing filled the small room. It was the guard's desk phone, an old landline model. He shot it an irritated look. "Security, Davies." He listened for a moment, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. "The north entrance? Who is—" "I didn't call for a manager." He listened again, his brow furrowing. His eyes darted nervously towards Aisha, who hadn't moved. "Yes, sir. I understand." Right away, he hung up the phone, his movements suddenly clumsy. He looked at the people in his tiny office as if seeing them for the first time. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, fearful uncertainty. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his voice now a low murmur, directed at Aisha. The question hung in the air. Who could she possibly know that would have the mall's head of security personally radioing a guard in the basement? Mark's smirk finally vanished. He pushed himself off the wall, a flicker of genuine unease in his eyes. He had assumed she was a nobody. The foundation of his cruelty was built on that assumption. Now, a crack was appearing in that foundation. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder, amplifying the tense, waiting silence. 12 minutes had passed. The office door opened without a knock. The man who entered was not large or physically imposing in the way a movie gangster might be. He was of average height, slender, and dressed in a charcoal gray suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to move with him as a second skin. His black hair was cut with razor precision, and his face was calm, almost serene, betraying nothing. This was Min-jun. But it wasn't his appearance that immediately seized control of the room. It was the atmosphere that entered with him. The air grew still, heavy, charged with an unspoken authority that made the guard's uniform and clipboard seem like a child's costume. 2 other men, broader and dressed in similar dark suits, flanked the doorway, their presence a silent, immovable promise of consequence. They didn't look at anyone but the man they served. Officer Davies shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum. "Mr. Kwan," he stammered, his face pale. I wasn't aware you were on site." Min-jun's eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the room once. They passed over Mark and Tiffany with utter indifference, as if they were furniture. They briefly acknowledged the guard's panic state, and then they landed on Aisha. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face, a deep, quiet concern. He walked over to her, ignoring everyone else, and knelt on one knee so he was at her eye level. He gently took her hand. "Are you all right, Yobo?" he asked, his voice low and soft, a stark contrast to the cold power he projected. The Korean term of endearment, honey or darling, was spoken with such genuine tenderness that it reconfigured the entire reality of the room. Mark stared, his mouth slightly agape. He was trying to connect the dots between the broke waitress he'd just humiliated and this man who commanded the instant, terrified respect of the mall's security. Tiffany had finally stopped recording, her phone hanging limp in her hand, her face a mask of disbelief. Aisha gave her husband's hand a small squeeze. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. Min-jun stood up, his demeanor shifting back to an icy calm. He turned his attention to Officer Davies, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "My associate has the footage from your own cameras," he said, his English perfect, with only a trace of an accent. "He will show you what happened. Then, you will tell me why you brought my wife to a back room instead of the man who assaulted her." The word, wife, landed like a grenade. It detonated every assumption Mark had built his cruelty upon. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, sickly pallor. His world, so carefully constructed on a hierarchy of status and wealth, was tilting on its axis. He was no longer the man with the Rolex and the power. He was just a piece of furniture in a room that now belonged entirely to Mr. Kwon. One of the men who had entered with Min-jun stepped forward. He held a sleek, dark tablet. Without a word, he turned the screen towards Officer Davies. On it, crystal-clear footage from a high-angle CCTV camera was playing. It showed the entire scene, devoid of ambiguity. There was Mark, striding purposefully. There was the deliberate, vicious kick. The explosion of groceries. The apples rolling across the floor. The audio was clean, picking up Mark's taunts with perfect clarity. "Guess it's ramen noodles again tonight, huh? Eh?" Then, the tablet user swiped, and a new video began to play. This one was shakier, filmed from a lower angle. It was Tiffany's video, which had likely been wirelessly acquired from her phone the moment Min-jun's team entered the mall's network. Her snide giggle was loud and clear. "Literally so clumsy," she said, her voice a shrill counterpoint to Mark's cruelty. The playback continued, showing Davies' arrival, his dismissive body language, his conversation exclusively with Mark, and his final, biased command for Aisha to clean up the mess. It was a complete, damning, and irrefutable record of events. Officer Davies watched, his face turning from pale to a deep, blotchy red. Every ounce of his procedural authority was stripped away, revealing the petty prejudice beneath. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man watching his own execution. Min-jun didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet control was more terrifying than any shout. He turned his gaze for the first time, directly onto Mark. It was not a look of anger, but of cold, clinical assessment, like a biologist studying an insect before dissecting it. "You worked at Sterling Roth Financial," Min-jun said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of a fact that was about to become past tense. Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. Sterling Roth was his entire identity. It was the source of his suit, his watch, his car, his confidence. How do you know that?" he stammered. Min-jun's associate, the one holding the tablet, made a quiet phone call. He spoke a few words in Korean, his tone clipped and efficient. A moment later, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with a trembling hand. An email notification glowed on the screen. The subject line was stark: immediate termination of employment. His face went slack with shock. He swiped it open, his eyes scanning the formal, brutal language.
Gross misconduct.
Violation of the company's public image clause. Effective immediately. A second email arrived.
And a third.
His corporate accounts were locked. His access to the company's server was revoked. A final text message chimed. It was from the fleet manager for his company car. The vehicle's GPS had been activated, and it was to be repossessed within the hour. All of it, the complete and total dismantling of his professional life, had taken less than 90 seconds. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with panic, and stared at the man who had just erased his career with a single, whispered phone call. Min-jun's attention shifted, moving from the professionally ruined Mark to the socially terrified Tiffany. She instinctively tried to hide her phone, as if it were the source of all her problems, but it was far too late. "You are Tiffany Lowell," Min-jun stated. Again, not a question. "You are a social media influencer. Your brand is built on a carefully curated image of aspirational lifestyle and positivity." Tiffany nodded numbly, her meticulously applied lipstick suddenly looking garish under the harsh fluorescent lights. Min-jun's associate swiped the tablet again, showing her Instagram profile, vibrant and full of smiling photos. Then he swiped once more. A new screen appeared, a live feed monitoring online activity. A video was going viral. It was her video, the one she had just filmed. But it had been re-edited. It was now spliced with a high-quality CCTV footage, overlaid with text that read, "Influencer Tiffany Lowell and ex-boyfriend Mark Jennings mock and assault a woman at Galleria Grand." The post included their full names and Mark's now former place of employment. Below the video, comments were flooding in by the hundreds, then thousands. They were a torrent of digital outrage. Disgusting. Cancelled. Hope your sponsors see this as if on cue. Tiffany's phone began to buzz uncontrollably in her hand, a frantic, rattling vibration against her palm. Notifications poured across her screen. Emails from her brand partners, a boutique clothing line, a makeup company, a wellness tea brand, all with subject lines like contract review and urgent, partnership termination. Her carefully built world of sponsorships and affiliate links was dissolving in real time. She stared at the screen, her face crumpling in horror. The digital persona she had spent years creating was being immolated before her very eyes, torched by the very tool she had used to humiliate another. Finally, Minjun's gaze settled back on Officer Davies. The guard stood ramrod straight, sweating profusely. "You have a security license issued by the state," Minjun said, his voice dangerously soft. "You also have a mortgage with Daehan Capital Bank and 2 children attending Northwood Academy on a scholarship fund." The level of detail was staggering. This wasn't just power, it was omniscience. Daehan Capital is a subsidiary of my family's corporation, and I am the primary benefactor of the Northwood Scholarship Fund. You will be fired from this position by the end of the day. A formal complaint will be filed with the state licensing board, citing gross negligence and biased conduct, supported by video evidence. Your license will be revoked. The bank will be reviewing the terms of your loan, and the academy will be reassessing your children's eligibility for financial aid. Is that understood? Davies could only nod, a single, pathetic jerk of his head. He had chosen to align himself with what he perceived as power, and in doing so, had made an enemy of real power. The consequences were not just professional, they were personal, generational, and absolute. The room was silent save for the frantic, incessant buzzing of Tiffany's phone, a soundtrack to their collective ruin. Mark finally broke, the last vestiges of his bravado shattering completely. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. He took a stumbling step toward Minjun. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible joke.
I'm sorry.
"I'll pay for the groceries." "I'll do anything." One of Minjun's men moved, a subtle, fluid motion that placed him directly in Mark's path without touching him. The message was clear. Do not come any closer. Minjun looked at his wife. He wasn't asking for permission, but for her preference. This was her justice, not his. Aisha met his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Minjun turned back to Mark and Tiffany, who was now openly weeping, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. "An apology is required," Minjun said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "But not to me. And not here." He outlined the terms with the precision of a surgeon. "You will both record a new video. In it, you will offer a full, unreserved apology to my wife, using her name. You will detail exactly what you did, the assault, the mockery, the filming, and you will state that your behavior was unacceptable. You will not make excuses. You will not ask for forgiveness. You will simply state the truth of your actions and your regret." He paused, letting the weight of the command settle. "Furthermore, you will make a donation of $50,000 to the St. Jude Women's Shelter, the charity my wife volunteers for. You will show proof of the donation in the video. You will post this video to all of your social media accounts. You have 48 hours." Mark looked like he'd been punched. 50,000? I just lost my job. "I don't have that kind of money." "Sell your watch," Minjun replied without missing a beat. "Sell your car if you still technically have it. Find it. Or the alternative is a civil lawsuit for assault, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress that will follow you for the rest of your life. My lawyers are very good. They will not settle. They will take everything you have left, and everything you ever hope to earn. The choice is yours." He then looked at Davies. "As for you," he said, "you will escort them out of the mall. And then you will clean out your locker." With that, he offered his arm to Aisha. She took it, and together they walked out of the suffocating little room, leaving the 3 architects of their own destruction to drown in the silence and the consequences. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound as final as a gavel strike. 3 days later, a grainy, poorly lit video appeared online. In it, a haggard-looking Mark and a puffy-eyed Tiffany recited a stilted, humiliating apology. At the end, Mark held up a screenshot of a bank transfer for $50,000. The video was viewed millions of times, becoming a textbook example of internet karma. Mark was last seen working as a cashier at a 24-hour convenience store. Tiffany deleted all her social media and disappeared from public view. Officer Davies lost his license and ended up taking a job as a nighttime janitor. Their downfall was as swift as it was complete. 6 months passed. The city had moved on, the viral moment forgotten by all but those it had irrevocably changed. The autumn chill was giving way to the first hints of winter. Inside a small, unassuming diner far from the glittering opulence of the Galleria Grande, Aisha and Minjun sat in a worn vinyl booth. The air smelled of coffee and fried bacon. It was the diner where Aisha used to work, a place she still visited to see old friends. They were laughing about something, a private joke, when a young waitress, no older than 19, approached their table with a coffee pot. She was new, her movements nervous and jerky. As she reached to refill Minjun's cup, her hand trembled, and a stream of hot, dark coffee sloshed over the side, splashing directly onto the sleeve of his expensive, custom-made cashmere coat. The girl froze, her face draining of all color. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm so sorry." The diner manager, a harried man named Sal, saw the commotion and rushed over, his face a thundercloud. "What did you do?" he hissed at the waitress, grabbing the coffee pot from her trembling hand. "This is a $5,000 coat. Are you kidding me? You're fired. Get your things and get out." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She looked utterly broken, a small, insignificant event about to shatter her world. It was a perfect, terrible echo of that day in the mall, a public mistake, an expensive item, an authority figure rushing to judgment, and a young woman about to be crushed under the weight of it all. Aisha saw the parallel instantly. She saw the same fear in the waitress's eyes that she must have had in her own. Before Minjun could even react, Aisha placed a calming hand on his arm. His face, which had hardened slightly at the manager's outburst, softened as he looked at her. He understood. She then turned her warm, kind gaze to the terrified waitress. "It's just a coat," Aisha said, her voice gentle. "It's not a problem. Please don't worry about it." She looked at Sal, the manager. "And she is not fired. It was an accident. Everyone has them." Sal looked from Aisha to the imposing, silent figure of Minjun, and then back to Aisha's calm, resolute face. He knew who she was, and he knew who her husband was. Her word was law in this establishment. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, backing away sheepishly. Aisha smiled at the waitress, who was still standing there, stunned and teary-eyed. "Could we just get some club soda and a cloth, please?" The girl nodded, wiping her eyes, and scurried off, a look of profound, disbelieving gratitude on her face. When she returned, Aisha and Minjun cleaned the coat as best they could, making light of it. They finished their meal, and as they prepared to leave, Aisha slid a folded bill under her coffee cup. It was a $500 tip. The power to destroy was absolute, but the power to heal, to show grace where none was expected, was infinite. As they walked out into the cold evening air, Minjun wrapped the now slightly damp coat around her shoulders. He had dismantled 3 lives to protect her honor, but he knew, watching her in that moment, that her real strength wasn't in the power she could command, but in the empathy she chose to wield. That was a lesson no amount of money could buy, and no amount of force could ever teach. The final shot was not of revenge, but of redemption, a quiet act of kindness that rippled out into the world, balancing the scales in a way that pure destruction never could.